So those of you that can hear us and are on the actual cabinet lawn grounds. Good morning and welcome. I'm Tina Evans, and with me today is Heather Whalen.
Good morning, Tina.
It is a pleasure to serve today as your commentators. We will give you, before the arrival of the MPs and also the senators, we'll provide some background about today's event. And this is interesting in that it is the first time that our new deputy governor, Mr. Tom Oppenheim, will participate in the convening of the legislature. And he is doing so. He will read the speech from the throne. He's doing so on behalf of Her Excellency, the Governor, Rena Loggy, who is unfortunately not with us today. So over the next few minutes, we will share some background information about the convening of Parliament and the convening of the legislature. Let me get that correct. And Heather, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Yes, we're going to share. Listening audience, some of the landmarks that show the political evolution of Bermuda. And we're going to interweave some of these political developments as we share the commentary on the formal ceremony of Bermuda's legislative calendar. So we hope that this history and the traditions and the political development will enrich your knowledge and your understanding.
And I'm glad you said that because Bermuda has progressed politically to that of a self-governing territory with control over most of our internal affairs. We've reached that position primarily as a result of the constitutional order established in 1968. We will share now several significant changes that came into place after the Constitution of 1968, sorry. The constitutional order by which Bermuda is governed, Bermuda's constitution, sets out the composition of the legislature. It states that the legislature of Bermuda, and I quote, shall consist of His Majesty, a Senate, and a House of Assembly. Heather?
That is so correct, Tina. The members of the Senate are also, as I said, referred to as the upper house. And members of the House of Assembly being referred to as the lower house. They're gathering right now in their respective chambers. This convening or coming together of those elected and appointed to discuss and deliberate on behalf of the people. This traces its history back to the earliest beginnings. Bermuda's legislative body is the oldest in the Commonwealth outside of the British Isles, and that dates back to the 1st of August, 1620, when the then governor, Nathaniel Butler, summoned the General Assembly to meet at St. Peter's Church. The General Assembly comprised of the governor, his council, and two male representatives from the 8 tribes. Now we call them parishes, as the colony had been divided. And it was at that first assembly, Tina, that the governor said, and I quote, "We come not for ourselves only or any man's particular interest, but to serve and regard the public. We are therefore to rid ourselves from all the desires of gain. We are to despise all personal interests." That charge is fitting even today, Tina.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right now, I think I've seen, yes, the black rod is in place, and a little later, he will be dispatched by the deputy governor to summon the members of the House of Assembly to the Cabinet lawn. The black rod this year is Chief Inspector Alex Rowland, and you will see him standing there right outside the doors of the Cabinet office. Our House of Assembly is actually the lower house of our legislature. Members are elected, and during a general election, recent general elections, I should say, occurred in October 2020, when the Progressive Labor Party, led by Premier the Honorable David Burt, was returned to power, having won 30 of 36 seats. Thus, the current government is led by the Progressive Labor Party. Now, earlier, we drew reference to Bermuda's political evolution, which is attributable in a large part to the constitutional order introduced in 1968. We should also point out that there were key figures who, without fear, challenged the status quo. For example, the evolution of the franchise is the result of persons who questioned and challenged the status quo, the ability to vote, and because the right to vote, as you know, Heather, you could. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Tina. The right to vote, and some people will assume that we've had that right to vote for centuries, for decades, but we haven't. Not only has it hasn't always been afforded to people 18 years old and older. The right to, and officially from the 1600s and officially established by the legislature in 1789, only males who owned land valued at 24 pounds could vote. And political candidates had to own land valued at 124 pounds. This had the effect of excluding many from the political process, rendering them voiceless. Property owning women finally won the right to vote in 1944, excuse me. And this was a direct result of the actions of the Bermuda Women's Suffrage Society, an organization that was first formed in 1923 to raise awareness about the disparities in voting. The property requirements had the effect of disenfranchising the majority of the Black people. And you know, it's noteworthy that after emancipation, the land requirements were raised significantly, such that only males who own land now valued at 60 pounds were eligible to vote, and a political candidate, a male had to own property valued at 240 pounds, thus excluding many from voting. This state of affairs did not change until the middle of the 20th century.
Incredible.
Tina, we see the permanent secretaries arriving
Yes.
and taking their seats.
And also, we have the members of the judiciary arriving right now. The Chief Justice Mr. Justice Dorinda Hargan, the Honorable Miss Justice Nicole Stoneham, the Honorable Justice Sade Severe Williams, the Honorable Justice Larry Musselman, and the Honorable Juan Wolf, who is a puny judge. Miss Alexander Wheatley, the Registrar, or as well. And we have from the Court of Appeal, and they are dressed in the black robes, the Right Honorable Christopher Clark, the Right Honorable Maurice Kay, the Honorable Justice Geoffrey Bell, and also Mr. Coelho, Audrey Coelho, clerk to the Court of Appeal. So they have
Yes.
arrived.
They have arrived and looking splendid and great.
We'll carry on with a
Yes.
little bit as we're still waiting. Another challenge to Bermuda's political system was launched in 1960 by the Committee for Universal Adult Suffrage, and it was formed by Paolo Camafareg. I said it wrong. I knew it. Also known by us as Roosevelt Brown. They challenged Bermuda's undemocratic voting system, and Bermuda witnessed a political watershed in 1963 when the Parliamentary Election Act allowed every Bermudian 25 years or older to have the right to vote. Further political developments occurred in 1966 when the voting age was lowered to 21 years. And the property vote.
That established political party, with the United Bermuda Party being established in 1964. As you said, the parliamentary constitution made several changes, and it was a political watershed. And so Bermuda is referred to now as a self-governing colony. And what has been left to the government to take care of, because we are an a self-governing colony, are the internal matters. So government has been given responsibility for domestic matters such as education, health, transport, finance, public works, and immigration, whilst the governor retains control of external affairs such as the defense, the armed forces, the police,
Right, and the regiment.
and the regiment, with the Royal Bermuda Regiment, which falls under the responsibility of corrections as well. And the Executive Council and the Legislative Council were changed to the Cabinet and Senate, respectively.
And we should be soon seeing another 10 minutes or so the arrival of the governor. Uh, as a result, I think you mentioned that about that,
Mhm,
the Constitutional Conference
mhm,
of
mhm.
68. And then come 1979, other changes were brought in, provided that elected members of parliament were now referred to as MPs,
Mhm.
members of parliament. Previously, they'd been referred to as members of the colonial
Mhm.
parliament, and members in charge became ministers, and the executive council became the cabinet, and thus the continuing evolution of parliament. And it is noteworthy that this change in government did not take place until after 1968, until the momentous general election of 1998, when the opposition Progressive Labor Party came to power for the first time as a result of a general election. Bermuda also witnessed the first, during that year, 1998, witnessed the first political appointment of an attorney general. And in July 2003, following changes to Bermuda's constitution, the general election took place under the revised format of 36 single seat constituencies. Remember
Yeah.
those double seat constituencies? All that?
And that was how some people were able to vote in several constituencies,
Uh,
especially if they owned land.
yeah.
So that kind of swayed things as well.
So
You
there's
know,
been some
there's
progression.
been some progression, yes,
Yes,
and
yes,
political development. So we
yes,
see the
absolutely.
evolution. Now, some people may ask about the House of Assembly and the Senate, and they may ask about how decorum is established and maintained.
Mm.
Uh, Tina, I'd just like to mention that it's the House of Assembly, the Speaker of the House, and the President of the Senate who maintain decorum in those chambers,
And they do.
and they do. And there's certain etiquette and there's certain parliamentary rules.
Mhm.
For example, one of the rules is that it shall be out of order for members of parliament to use offensive language about other members of parliament or language that is in bad taste or brings the house into disrepute. There's another rule which stipulates that no member shall be referred to by name only. The
Mhm.
standard practice is to refer to the member as the honorable member, and they then indicate which constituency. And people may wonder also about the voting. Now, the speaker, he's expected to be unbiased. And his responsibility, as I said, was to maintain and ensure that the rules are adhered to. Whereas the president, she is allowed to enter into the debates from the very beginning.
Namely, also the president, how one becomes the president of the Senate. The president of the Senate is recruited from amongst the ranks of the independent senators. The president of the Senate may also participate in the debates and has the right to an original vote. That is to say, the president gets to vote immediately on a matter that is being discussed in Senate rather than only voting in the event of a tie. Whereas, conversely, the Speaker of the House of Assembly is not entitled to participate in debates in the House of Assembly and can only cast a vote in the event of a tie. The underlying principle here is that speakers casting vote should be used in such a way as to permit further discussion on the issue on which a vote has been taken.
Mhm.
So that is, and of course, we know that the Speaker of the House is the Honorable Dennis Lister Sr., and the President is Mrs. Joan Dillis Wright, President of the Senate. The Senate will adjourn shortly, and they'll be arriving, and the Senate President will wait on the steps for the arrival of the Deputy Governor. And we invite you, please, when the governor arrives, to stand when the governor arrives. But you'll see Mrs. Joan Dillis Wright standing at the door waiting for the arrival of the governor. Two members, deputy
Deputy
governor.
governor.
Uh,
Yeah.
Listen, I'm gonna I'm gonna remember that whole thing. Deputy governor, of course. Um, I saw you had pulled out a little bit about our current governor.
Yes.
Yeah,
Other than the
Governor
fact
Rena.
that Rena Laghi, Her Excellency, our current governor, is the
Yeah,
first female governor,
yeah.
she comes with a wealth of experience and knowledge. She was formerly director of Office of Financial Sanctions and implementation. She served as Director of Operations for UK Trade and Investment and Department of Business Innovation. She was Deputy Director. So our governor has lots
Yes,
of experience.
absolutely. Okay, the deputy governor has arrived. I do believe he has already dispatched Black Rod. Yes, I'm at a little bit of a loss being not able to see the screen. I apologize. So Black Rod has been dispatched.
Oh,
Black Rod will go and summon the House of Assembly to the Cabinet lawn. The House is meeting in Veritas Place, members of the House of Assembly. He will knock on the door and they will come to the door and they will say, he will say, gentlemen, usher of the Black Rod, I command you to inform the Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly to request his honorable presence for the House honorable presence forthwith.
yes. And then the deputy governor will await the return of Black Rod. The deputy governor will be escorted into the building, and then he will be escorted onto the cabinet lawn by his aide de camp. The
Yep.
deputy governor, by the way, is Mr. Tom Oppenheim. We did say that the Black Rod is Chief Inspector Alex Rollin.
Yes, and I see members of the magistrates,
Yes.
Bermuda's magistrates
Yes.
arriving. Senior magistrate Maxine Anderson and new magistrate Maria Safianas. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
she's just been appointed. And then,
Yes.
of course, that is Magistrate Chin, who is the magistrate, senior magistrate, and magistrates take their seats. Of course, they're part of the judiciary.
This, I want to share this fact with you before we go on. There are some family connections and associations that might be of interest to you, and these are mostly the House of Assembly family connections. There have been times when we've had uncles and nephews who sat in the house at the same time, kind of Bermuda though, at the same time or followed each other. There have been cousins that have sat on either side of each other on the house. There
And
was
their
also a father
father
and daughter.
Yes.
Now people got to think, who's that? A
That's
father and daughter. There's currently a father and son who sits in the House of Assembly. And you could say that politics definitely runs in the family.
Yeah.
It's Bermuda,
It's Bermuda.
but
And just like our governor is the first female to hold that role,
Right.
Gloria McVie was the first woman to be appointed to a cabinet post.
Absolutely.
And here's some of the new senators for this legislative
Well,
year.
the senators are getting ready to arrive, and they will take their seats. And of course, should everything be in order, there's the new senators.
Newly appointed government senator, Reverend Dr. Emily Gail Dill.
Mrs. Karen Bell, the newly appointed
Yes.
Vice President of the Senate, Mr. John Wright, and the clerk to the Senate, Mr. Clark Sumner, government senators, Senator and now Minister of Youth, Culture, and Sports, Owen Darrell, Senator Lindsey Simmons, Senator Ariana Hudson, Senator Reverend Dr. Ernest Peets, Senator Reverend Dr. Emily Gail Dill, opposition senators, Senator Ben Smith, Senator Robin Tucker, and Senator Dr. Douglas DeCudo. So
Mhm.
the senators have arrived. We are waiting now the arrival of the members of the House of Assembly.
And Tina, while we have time, we were talking about women who have played crucial roles in politics. And you may know that the Honorable Dame Jennifer Smith of the Progressive Labor Party was one of the outstanding women who served in the position of premier, as well as the Honorable Dame Pamela Gordon for the United Bermuda Party. So women have played outstanding roles in politics.
Yeah, and Paula Cox was premier as well. So,
That's right.
yeah, we've had three, three women premiers. For today's convening, I'd like to mention this as well. And then the prayers will be led by Bishop Stephen Jones, presiding bishop of United Holy Church of Bermuda, pastor of Beulah Tabernacle in Somerset. And he will do the prayers right before the reading of the speech.
Yes, and people will notice that the deputy governor, when he's when the prayer is being offered, he will take off his headdress, and after the prayers, he will put his headdress back on, and then he will read the speech from the throne. The speech from the throne is prepared by the government of the day, and it outlines their initiatives and plans for the upcoming legislative year.
Now, immediately following, I have to put a little commercial in here because everyone will ask, where's the speech from the throne? The throne speech. It will be available online at www.gov.pm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the days of printing is
And
over.
papers.
Yes,
And you
yes.
see us, reams of paper. Well, Tina, the last time that we were on cabinet grounds was in 2019. In 2020, people may remember that the convening actually took place in the lovely historic town of St. George, that's also been designated a World Heritage Site. And it was taking place there because at that time in 2020, Bermuda was celebrating its 400th anniversary as a colony.
Yeah, yeah. It was a beautiful
It was,
occasion
wasn't it? It
down on
was
the town
lovely,
square.
right in
It
the
was
town
very
square.
lovely, very lovely. I think I saw on the monitor the arrival of Sir John Swan. Yes, and we have the president, Sir John Swan, and we have now the arrival of the Senate President, Joan Dillis Wright.
And she's being escorted by the commanding officer of the Royal Bermuda Regiment, uh, Lieutenant Colonel Beasley. I'm told that he's the youngest person to fill that role. Now, the deputy governor has some diplomatic experience as well. He served in the embassy in Moscow and other places, and so he comes with experience as well. The
Mhm.
diplomatic corps, if you will.
Yes. Yep, it's good to be back on the cabinet grounds and to enjoy today's proceedings as the government lays out the legislative agenda and initiatives for the next 365 days. And we're delighted that the weather held up.
You know, I was about to say that.
Well, it's Bermuda.
It's Bermuda,
You
isn't
could
it?
have four seasons in
In
one
one
day.
day. So we have sunshine and blue skies, a bit of wind, but that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, the weather held up.
And we await the arrival of the members of the House of Assembly,
And
led by the Premier, the Honorable E. David Burt. And
and should there be no constitutional crisis happening up the hill,
well,
they should be on the walk
they should
down
be.
from Veritas Place.
Yes, they have been gathering at Veritas Place, and
And they will return to the House, and the Senate will return following the procedures today.
they will begin their business of the year on behalf of the people of Bermuda. Now, when we talk about the house, there are some symbols that people might want to know about. For example, there's the mace. That's the symbol of the speaker's authority. It's a silver gilt mace, and it was crafted in 1920 by Garrett and Company in Great Britain to commemorate the 300th anniversary of Bermuda's Parliament. It's the Sergeant at Arms who carries the mace on his right shoulder when the Speaker is entering and leaving the House of Assembly and attending the convening of Parliament. This practice parallels a similar convention in the House of Commons in Great Britain and those jurisdictions which have adopted the Westminster system of government. The mace is a necessary accompaniment to the proceedings of the lower house. The mace rests on two brackets prepared for it on the front of the clerk's table when the house is in full session. And the other parliamentary symbol is that of the gavel. It's a wooden gavel, and it has closer ties to Bermuda since it was made from a Bermuda cedar tree, which was growing in St. Peter's churchyard when the first assembly met in 1620. So we do have those significant parliamentary symbols and their ties to our earliest beginnings.
Yes, I've been made to understand that they've made their way, they've left Veritas Place, and they're making their way here.
Unfortunately, the weather is cooperating and they don't have to walk in the rain. So,
Absolutely. And in just a few minutes, the deputy governor and the aide de camp will leave the building and will head to alight the throne steps.
here's
All
the
right.
deputy governor now being escorted, and I believe he's being escorted by the aide de camp through the crowd, through the audience. It's a lovely setting. All stand as the deputy governor enters. And as been said,
All right, now we have the arrival of the members of parliament. The members of parliament are being led by the Black Rod, and the Sergeant at Arms, Major Arnold Allen, Clerk to the Legislature, Mrs. Shernette Wolf, Deputy Speaker of the House, the Honorable Derek Burgess. Those they are arriving, followed by the Premier, Minister of Finance, the Honorable E. David Burt, the Opposition Leader and Shadow Minister, Finance, the Honorable Cole Simons, Government Whip is Scott Simmons, Deputy Premier, Minister of Home Affairs is the Honorable Walter Raban. The Attorney General, Minister of Legal Affairs is the Honorable Kathy Lynn Simmons. Minister of the Cabinet is the Honorable Vance Campbell. Minister of Health, Kim Wilson. Minister of Public Works, the Honorable Lieutenant David Birch. Minister of Education, the Honorable V.S. Rabin. The Honorable Jason Haywood is Minister of Economy and Labor. The Honorable Wayne Furbett is the Minister of Transport. The Honorable Tanae Furbett is the Minister of Social Development and Seniors. And the Honorable Michael Weeks is the Minister of National Security.
Correct. And they are being followed by
Members of the House of Assembly.
members of the House of Assembly.
Did we, and I do believe there was a youth parliamentarian there,
Michelle
Michelet
Corday.
Corday.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Heavenly Father, we come before you today, grateful for this season and for this opportunity to give you praise. Thanking you, God, for spirit life during pandemic, during hurricanes and storms, physical and emotional. But Father, we know that you are with us. Today, God, we pray for our leadership, our Governor Lauji, for the Deputy Governor Oppenheim. Good God, you will continue to lead and guide them with your right counsel. Today, we lift up our leaders today, our Premier, the Honorable David Burt, his entire cabinet. God, we're praying for your wisdom today as we start something that's very important to our country. God, we continue to pray for our opposition, Mr. Cole Simons, and his entire team. We lift up the Senate. We lift up the House of Assembly. God, you know what we stand in need of today. And God, we pray that as we serve our country, we are truly blessed in the island of Bermuda. Help us, oh God, to do our very best to please you first and to represent our country that needs us the most. We thank you for this time that we can be together to give you praise and thanks again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly. Bermuda has been tested. Our families, systems and institutions have been confronted with immense strains that have threatened to radically alter Bermuda's and Bermudans' way of life. In the face of these trials, the government is determined to lead an economic recovery that is centred on restoring the hope of the people today and embracing the potential of the island's future. In his work, Meditations of the Heart, Dr. Howard Thurman noted, whatever may be the tensions and the stresses of a particular day, there is always lurking close at hand the trailing beauty of forgotten joy or unremembered peace. It is the government's responsibility to aid in easing the tensions and stresses of this unprecedented age. The cost of living relief package recently approved by the legislature will continue to deliver that aid, bringing relief to the people in those areas where costs continue to rise. The cost of living essential commodities regulations will be brought into force this month, prescribing how the Cost of Living Commission will monitor the price of essential commodities and confirming those commodities previously outlined as essential and which attract a 0% rate of duty. Deliberate action by the government provided the economic bridge that assisted many Bermudians through the harshest days of the pandemic. As we dare to speak now in post-pandemic terms, the need for government-led action remains very real. People still need help, and the government's legislative programme will help families to better meet their needs, supporting businesses to encourage growth and job creation, and modernising those systems helping the island's most vulnerable citizens. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, during this session, honourable members will be invited to approve amendments to the Child Daycare Allowance Act 2008 to increase the awards under the Act and to expand the pool of persons eligible for this benefit. The increasing cost of childcare has added to the economic stresses for parents, and these amendments will allow more parents to receive this vital service, which is fundamental to the economic activity the island needs. Amendments to the Financial Assistance Act 2001 and the regulations of 2004 will advance the next phases of financial assistance reform. Changes will be made to the schedule of allowable expenses to better reflect realistic costs of goods and services for which assistance is provided. Building blocks, a phase of this reform, will assist households requiring immediate assistance with expenses for a short period. Sudden hardships occur in life, like redundancy or a change in household composition owing to some tragic circumstance. In these instances, financial assistance can be provided to meet these short-term needs. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, the workers of Bermuda form an economic foundation that drives the success of business and the delivery of a variety of key services. Workers must be protected, and industrial relations within the economy will be enhanced by certainty and understanding of the rights and responsibilities of all parties. The government will advance a bill to create a Department of Labour, giving statutory authority to posts within the department to ensure that workers' rights are protected and employers have certainty in the application of Bermuda's labour legislation. Having published a position paper entitled Establishing a Minimum Wage in Bermuda, the Ministry of Economy and Labour has led a fulsome consultation on the implementation of a minimum wage for Bermuda. The government will deliver on that promise with the tabling of an order to prescribe a minimum hourly wage rate for Bermuda pursuant to Section 11 of the Employment Wage Commission Act 2019. The success of international business is owed, in some measure, to industry innovation, active public-private collaboration, and a constantly evolving legislative and regulatory framework. This approach must be replicated in another pillar of the economy, tourism. The government's role is to provide the legislation that will support a tourism recovery, and as such, in this session, the legislature will take under consideration amendments to the Tourism Investment Act 2017 to permit the government greater discretion in the grant of relief under the Act to developers and those investing in attractions, restaurants, and hotels. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly. The Ministry of Health has been at the vanguard of the fight against the pandemic. This team and all those frontline healthcare workers have made great sacrifices to keep an already strained system delivering expert care for Bermuda. The professional registration process for health professionals will be streamlined as the Bermuda Health Council transfers its systems to a blockchain-backed online platform. Virtual meetings will now verify electronic documents in a new process, allowing healthcare professionals to store their documents in a secure electronic wallet with capabilities for payments. This technology will also enable greater transparency and opportunities for consumers to engage with businesses with real-time updates on services and confirmation of licensure, as well as information on pricing and the collection of valued feedback from consumers and providers. There are many aspects of healthcare reform that will take time to implement. However, during this session, legislation will be advanced to support data collection as a necessary first step for the introduction of controls around medical co-payments required of the most vulnerable. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly, the world has borne witness to the impact of climate change. Much of the biodiversity of the world's oceans exists within island communities like Bermuda. Small island states must continue to safeguard the environment and adopt measures to mitigate these impacts. To further address related environmental issues, during this session, the government will introduce the following: a bill to reduce single-use plastics, amendments to the Clean Air Act to update air quality standards, make new provision for odour control, and increase penalties for non-compliance. A Marine Development Act to provide the framework for the management of the Marine Spatial Plan and to introduce the governance structure for the Blue Economy Fund, as well as the investment model for the Green Energy Fund. Amendments to the Electricity Act 2016 to create community solar, an investment opportunity for Bermudian entrepreneurs and solar installers, which through the Green Energy Fund will provide access to those families unable to afford the installation of this cheaper source of energy. And the government will bring into full force the Pesticide Safety Act 2009 and introduce regulations under the Act to establish guidelines for the importation, sale, use and disposal of pesticides in Bermuda. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly. Bermuda's children present the most precious opportunity for the continued success of our homeland. A child's earliest years, from gestation through to the age of 2, are the most formative and vulnerable periods of life. These years feature intense brain development, the formation of first relationships, and the definition of the psyche. Experiences during this critical period can not only impact the health of the child, but often set the trajectory for health and wellness for life. The government will therefore introduce a First 1,000 Days initiative, a pathway that will provide the foundation leading to a healthy life. This will be done by mapping all touchpoints, the needs and drivers for services, documenting the gaps, disparities, and inequalities so that service integration is improved, leading to better outcomes and an improved quality of life. The pandemic magnified the unfortunate fact that economic stresses lead to increased social dysfunction and, in some extreme cases, domestic abuse and family violence. Recent data suggests that there is underreporting of incidences of intimate partner violence, and therefore many people who would benefit from supportive services or intervention are not doing so. Adult victims and children must be safeguarded in these situations. In partnership with Safe Lives UK, the government will introduce a model in which all necessary agencies are engaged in a more coordinated plan of action to manage the conduct of the perpetrator and provide protection for the victim. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly, the author and activist James Baldwin said, "The purpose of education is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions." The reform of public education remains the government's greatest priority. The progress to date has been realised despite the enormity of the task. And in this session, the legislature will consider amendments to the Education Act 1996 to establish P7 and P8 classes to support the opening of parish primary schools at Francis Patten Primary School and Purvis Primary School. The reform effort has seen design teams undertaking the work required to prepare each school and school family for their growth and establishment as parish primary schools. With an Education Authority working group led by change and education professionals now consulting with education stakeholders to develop an entity to deliver the needs and future direction of the public school system, the government will advance a bill to create an Education Authority. Once established, the authority will continue to implement change and necessary reforms to meet the needs of young people in Bermuda. During the work of reforming public education, the government has noted the proud histories of institutions and education professionals which have been elevated into the public discourse. Having established a history and legacy working group, the government will adopt one of their key recommendations and advance a bill to establish a history and legacy committee with statutory responsibilities to work with the community to preserve and honour the history and legacy of education in Bermuda. The government will also advance legislation to codify the nomination process and qualifying criteria for the selection of national heroes. The men and women who have been recognised through this designation have rendered exceptional service, and their lives have left an indelible imprint on Bermudian society. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly. In this session, the government will continue to prioritise the improvement of Bermuda's infrastructure. The completion of Phase 1 of the Water and Sewage Infrastructure Master Plan in March 2023 will see the installation of a new sewage treatment system, water production facilities, and the associated distribution system. These improvements will prevent the contamination of our inshore waters and treasured local beaches. Additionally, $22 million has been committed over the next 3 years to stabilise the critical systems at the Tynes Bay Waste-to-Energy facility. During this session, the legislature will take under consideration a bill to cement the merger of the West End Development Corporation and the Bermuda Land Development Company. This merger will reduce operating costs and increase operational efficiency, realising greater value for money within the public service. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly, successive administrations have wrestled with the development of Morgan's Point. The complex web of affairs at the site has occupied a team of advisors for the last 2 years as the government attempts to realise a return on the costly guarantee called owing to the project's failure. To that end, the Morgan's Point Resort Act of 2014 will be formally repealed and a new act of the legislature tabled to create a corporate entity comprised of qualified directors to oversee and direct the completion of the project. Working women and men in families of all makeups are encountering a crisis of affordability in the housing market. Securing available and affordable rental units is increasingly difficult. Entering the housing market is challenging with high down payments and high interest rates. People who do all that society demands of them simply cannot meet their housing needs, and the government must take deliberate action to assist. The recently launched Mortgage Guarantee Programme has been well subscribed, and during this session, the legislature will be advised of the next phases of that programme, which will include the transfer of existing mortgages on certain qualifying criteria. Additionally, to mirror the success of the previous decade in locations such as Loughlands, Perimeter Lane, Ewing Street, and the Harbourview Village, the Bermuda Housing Corporation will increase its rental stock by an additional 77 units, affordably priced through the Rent Geared to Income programme. A comprehensive review of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1974 and the Rent Increases Domestic Premises Control Act 1978 will lead to a consolidation of the legislation and amendments to address abuses by landlords and tenants alike. A greater balance must be struck whereby tenants' rights are protected and landlords will not fall prey to bad tenants whose actions serve to depreciate their hard-earned investment in their property. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly, the mammoth overhaul of Bermuda's trademark, patent, and intellectual property laws is nearing an end. The UK's IP Office has provided valuable insight and coordination on the development of all forms, fees, and regulations. Therefore, in this session, the legislature will consider a raft of bills in this area, which will provide a more attractive framework for those persons and companies wishing to register their intellectual property in Bermuda. As the government continues to review the public access to information legislation, this session will see a phased implementation of the Personal Information Protection (PIPER) Act 2016. Both acts will be aligned to ensure greater efficiencies in public information. This work will be supported by a more robust cybersecurity framework, improving the protection of public information from the ever-increasing threat of cyber attacks. The Companies Act 1981 is perhaps the most intricate of Bermuda's legislation and is subject to regular amendments to meet the changing needs of corporate operations and regulation. During this session, the Act and related legislation will be amended to streamline the regime of ministerial consent and permissions for basic operational matters in company formation and changes in ownership structure. The amendments will reduce the cost of doing business in Bermuda and remove a layer of ministerial oversight that is incongruous with the pace at which business affairs should be conducted in the 21st century. The state of the island's pension funds must be sensitively and prudently addressed. Unfunded liabilities must be confronted and social insurance contributions made progressive. For too long, Bermuda has been an international outlier, and our social insurance system must be made to conform to ideals of equity. Therefore, the government will introduce amendments to the Contributory Pensions Act 1970 to make provision for a sliding scale in contributions based on salary earned and not a uniform contribution irrespective of income. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and members of the House of Assembly. The Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service are Bermuda's first responders, covering the island with EMT expertise, firefighter capability, and specialist operations in support of critical infrastructure. To ensure the freshest approach to fitness for role, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services will be invited to conduct a review of the service, the first since 2010. The legislature will be invited to take note of that review and its recommendations. In this session, the government will amend the Fire Safety Act 2014 to clarify that the adoption of the National Fire Protection Agency codes applies only in relation to premises within the scope of the Act and not to the operation of air crash and fire rescue services. This will ensure that there is certainty around the appropriate minimum staffing levels and other operations for the LF Wade International Airport. The number one complaint of visitors to Bermuda is our transport system's inability to effectively move people around the island. Therefore, the government continues to implement various recommendations from the 2019 Transport Green Paper. Consultation is ongoing on the harmonisation of public service vehicles, and the government looks forward to receiving the news of existing permit holders as this much-needed modernisation is achieved. The successful integration of electric buses into the public transport fleet has shown that these vehicles can transform how we move on the roads in quieter, more environmentally friendly ways. Therefore, during this session, the legislature will be invited to consider a national electric vehicle policy and strategy for Bermuda, which will set out a plan to phase out the sale and importation of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. Safe driving habits must be ingrained in motorists at the earliest opportunity. Project RIDE has provided instruction to thousands of young people, but lacks an on-road training component, which, owing to current road traffic conditions, must be remedied. Therefore, amendments will be made to the Auxiliary Bicycles Act 1954 to create a learner's permit and to provide for on-road instruction and examinations for those seeking a bike licence. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in a display of unrivalled pageantry, the United Kingdom marked the end of its second Elizabethan era. Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II provided a lasting symbol of the monarchy and the mystery of the institution. However, the complexity of the legacy of colonialism has been manifested in recent pronouncements by Commonwealth countries now seeking to transcend independence and sever the final ties that bind their nations to the United Kingdom. As an overseas territory, Bermuda is not among them. Discussions on self-determination do not provoke the same well-trod arguments in London as they do here in Bermuda. The UK government approaches the issue maturely and encourages territories to do likewise. Accordingly, in keeping with that mature approach, the government commissioned and has now received a report entitled Assessment of Self-Governance Sufficiency in Conformity with Internationally Recognised Standards, prepared by Dr. Carlisle G. Corbyn, International Advisor on Governance. This assessment explores the minimum standards and the full range of self-government options for Bermuda. This is a first step and will be the basis of the necessary wide-ranging community discussion and education that must accompany any future action in this area. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, in addition to those bills set out herein, the legislature will also take under consideration a Trademarks Amendment Bill, an Intellectual Property Reform Bill, the Digital Asset Business Amendment Bill, Registrar General Recording of Documents Omnibus Bill, Health Insurance Amendment Bill, and a Vacation Rentals Amendment Bill. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, another vestige of the British colonial influence is the Westminster system and its core adversarial nature. This model sees honourable members facing off against one another, divided by an aisle, and embeds opposition in name and in practice to a government's programme in spite of its mandate. References to this style of government as a healthy democracy seem not to reflect the developments in those areas where this system endures. On August the 1st, 1620, Governor Butler addressed the first sitting of this legislature, and in words that apply to the women and men elected and appointed to serve even today, said, "Coming hither, we must bring equal minds with us, that is to say, without having our minds so preoccupied and taken up before as no room is left for justice and right." Bermuda's recovery and its path to continued success depends on all our minds having room left for justice and right, and her legislators providing the leadership and example necessary to see the island through this period of global challenge. Traditionally, at this point, the Governor is invited to add some words of her own. There is no doubting that significant challenges lie ahead. As the cost of living rises, it is critical that, as a society, we support the disadvantaged and those most vulnerable to global economic shocks. Bermuda's uniformed services have continued to access support and training opportunities through the UK on policing, defence and disaster preparedness. As the government delivers its strategies on health and the environment, we will continue to leverage UK resources to support wherever appropriate. World events in the last year demonstrate the importance of transparent, legitimate, and inclusive governments and institutions. The ability of the judiciary, legislature, and executive to fulfill their respective constitutional responsibilities will be essential to retaining Bermuda's hard-earned reputation for good governance, stability, respect for the rule of law, and compliance with international standards. Madam President and members of the Senate, Mr. Deputy Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, I declare this session open, and may God guide you in your deliberations. Sit. Sorry.
And that concludes the reading of the speech from the throne speech. And of course, government's agenda has been laid out, uh, covering a wide ranging topics, but starting first off with the cost of living and concluding in talks of what's next in terms of self-determination for Bermuda. And as we have talked today about the politics of Bermuda and the political landscape of Bermuda, and the year has started, and we can expect to hear more as the year goes on. We're reminding you as well, because I know folks are going to ask, where are the books? Where are the throne speech books? They are available online at gov.bm. They are available online at gov.bm. So the members of parliament will leave now to head back to the House, and the members of the Senate will return to chamber, and the day will conclude. We thank all of you for joining us today. Those of you that joined us via CITV or online streaming, thank you so much for joining us. We always enjoy bringing you the convening of Parliament. And
Absolutely.
those of you that were here on the lawn, it was great to have you here. Thank you so much. From Tina Evans, Heather
Heather
Whalen,
Whalen.
all the CITV team. You've got to remember the CITV team, also electronic services. We're here doing the audio, that's electronic services, and everyone that works so hard to put it together. Thank you so much, and have yourself a beautiful, wonderful Friday.